I decided to relax and contemplate upon my personal life for a while, and continued with my meditation group, knowing it helped others as well as me, realizing that there are far better and more beautiful things in life than existing in a dull coma. Life is better to enjoy without past or current concerns, for everything else remains part of the forgotten dreams. It is important to heed the invitation to where great feast is. It is important to smell the roses when passing through a rose garden. It is important to stop and let the whole world be experienced as one's special guest, for there is so much to learn. It is important to love one's own self and always endeavor to be happy. It is important to accept all life, from one's self to the entire universe and beyond, before aiming to be accepted by all. It is important to let the world be and make one's own inner changes first, if one desires those changes to become reality in the exterior world. It is important to think positively, even in the face of adversity, and everything will be influenced positively. It is important to see one's own self happy and healthy before any self-healing can be effected. It is important to forgive and leaving the past in the past, looking forward to new vistas and freshness in one's existence. A new zest to enjoy life without strife, directing this love to the entire world and humanity, knowing that thoughts are things. If I was able to help someone through those meditation sessions, I was exceedingly happy. I always endeavored never to cause any heartache or pain to anybody, but knowing that, like everybody else, I also had my failings and shortcomings, until the lesson was learned. I could have done certain things better if the wisdom I have today was available to me then. Therefore, I believe in total forgiveness and letting go. Conversely, there are people who try to change their world without realizing that the world they occupy is already changing. They would do much better if they start implementing the changes they want to see in the world within their own life's stream first. Acceptance of each other does not necessitate following the other's way of life or religious ideals. Acceptance cannot be achieved by demanding. Every individual represents the free-flowing energy, for life does not restrict anything or anyone. If there was no free-flowing energy in the universe, neither the universe nor any of us could be present, and there would be no progression and no evolution. I therefore elected to move on if and when I could not be accepted for who I was. Those who ardently tried to change me, through their unending criticisms and relentless demands, preferred to trim me against my will, perhaps thinking that I would function better, become more acceptable to them, or just fulfill their dreamt-of criteria. All I could do was accept them as past associates, forgiving them and moving on. However, I had to learn to be indifferent towards some, although I am grateful to them for allowing me to get to know them better, learning about their imagined wisdom. It was blissful to have no intrusions into my reverie by multiple concerns of those who would never consider my personal needs, such as time to ponder on issues interesting me, think creatively, and do the things I dreamt of, painting works of art, cooking, cleaning, and looking after my desperate needs, which had long been neglected due to regrettable circumstances. When I was surrounded with people presenting a severe case of negative narcissism, any form of association with them was extremely tiresome. I was happy with this break, which would probably not last long. During the same year, Damon started leaving more messages on my telephone, asking to meet me and demanding my help. His later messages became even more threatening, and he aggressively said that things would get very ugly. I was unsure what he meant with getting very ugly. Did he by any chance mean he would kill me if I did not immediately respond to his demands? I questioned him, and in answer he claimed it to be his speech pattern, and he did not mean anything serious. By this time I had formed a better idea about what I was dealing with. Like everybody else, needing to talk about something of this kind with one's friends, I spoke to members of my meditation group, and to my surprise they eagerly claimed that this man probably regretted his harsh criticisms of me and wanted to continue with his friendship. Joan in particular encouraged me to meet him and talk about how one should develop any friendship. With that in mind, I met him at Café Siena on Chapel Street, Prahran. I was very hesitant and apprehensive about all this, and felt like a subject of an experiment. Here one remembers a saying, "A person at the age of 7 remains the same at the age of 70. In his own eyes he was very kindly telling me that he did not know what came over him. Using threatening words to me apparently did not really mean anything as it came across. I said that I never desired to break any friendships. In the first place, in case this kind of behavior was experienced again, I would prefer not to continue with our association. He was calm and adamant that something like this would never, ever happen again. We had some food and cups of coffee and went back to his place, where he showed me what the Russians were building for him, a crystal shrine. He showed me his collection of tropical fish, which he loved immensely, and told me all about the ducks making his huge swimming pool their home. He also had a blown-up toy representing an alien from outer space, telling me that sometimes they visited him after entry through the triangular window in the ceiling. Most of his inspiration he had in the shower when the spirits, or something, as Christie once explained, were talking to him. He furthered his wisdom about how he was troubled with one of his girlfriends who was extraordinarily demanding. It seemed his psychic friend told him everything he needed to know, advising him to be patient with Suren, for he was going to be in touch with him when ready. However, he could not accept something like that. This alone showed me how obsessive people in his category were. I could understand what his other friends, relatives, and family had to put up with. It could not have been his wealth, which he often bragged about, although excessive amounts of buying power would make some believe they could easily buy and control people. When considering this issue analytically, his could only have been a disorder in the psychological sense, without naming it directly. I decided to consider my association with Damon as a project through which one could perhaps be able to help him, and in the process he would become a friendlier and happier person. Later conversations were mostly based upon his achievements in life, his successes in developing his business, and his desire to prove that he was better than his father-in-law thought. Even if we were talking about the beautiful flowers in the field, wonderful inventors of fantastic things which made our lives so much easier, he always found a way to divert the conversation to his own self, his successes, and his needs. Immediately after his self-praises, he would claim that he told all his friends and associates he was the Son of God and the expected Messiah. He often repeated, "Professore, I am telling you, all my friends also know I'm a bit cuckoo in the head, but I'm the one helping so many people." As our weekly meetings started on a friendly basis, and upon his promise that the other nonsense was not to continue, he kept telling me he could help me become very rich beyond my dreams. This started me to hearken to the strident sound of alarm bells, warning me to be very cautious. I was not a person who could so easily be convinced that somebody like him, with a grandiose wealth and supposed desire to help his perceived brother in need, would genuinely keep his word. The reasons for my diagnosis were not biased or judgmental. They were based upon observation. He treated his associates harshly and in the most judgmental manner, demanding, as if they were bound to serve him unconditionally. Whenever somebody owed him any small amount of money, albeit just $10, he would become very agitated, even vehemently cursing them. Damon often talked to me at length after almost every session, no matter what subjects we had been discussing, all about his own dilemmas and the people who cheated him. One of his most important stories was about lending large sums of money to people to develop something for him or help them to start a business. But listening to his spirit guide's voice in the shower or when Christy spoke about it, he immediately demanded the return of his money. Did Christy realize how much she influenced Damon by any chance? According to his stories one was forever obliged to listen to, he was helping many people because of his heartfelt care for others, always meaning well. Under the observed circumstances and secretly analytical considerations, one could only pretend to accept his wisdom. He needed to be praised every time he was with his friends. He had to be adored by everybody, believing he was more than human with a supreme mind. He had to be the god, for he could not be any less, just the same as Christy had once told me. He wanted to change people's thoughts so that they could all worship him. He often declared that his philosophies were inspired by the heavens and would change the world for the better. Professore, my professore, you know many things. Give me all the keys and I will wipe off all of humanity. Or we change their minds. You know, when we change their minds, we change everything. He often repeated himself, saying those same words over and over. In addition to this, he relentlessly questioned me about why I was not answering his messages on the telephone, advising me he would immediately answer people no matter what he might be doing. This would be followed by his lecture about how I should live my life and follow his counsel. Again, his philosophies consisted of the following wisdom. To be successful, one needs to be intelligent, charming, and having plenty of money, emphatically concluding with, "I've got all three." One of his friends, a young man of Jewish origin, was fascinated with my photographs of unidentified flying objects, which I had captured one morning just above my Springvale dwelling during my walk. He even wanted to have a poster-sized print of one of them, showing the huge disc-shaped object above the rooftop. I never had a chance to present him with it, as too many things have happened since then. However, this young man advised me, after discovering that I was planning to travel around the world, and Damon wanted to share the experience, what one could expect. Damon is an impossible person to be with when anyone travels with him, for he criticizes everyone about their clothing, as if he is any better, and hurts people's feelings. You must have real courage to go with Damon. Personally, I never go anywhere with him. Here was a young man who has obviously associated with Damon for a much longer time than me, speaking of these things discreetly, while the other prepared tea in his kitchen. That information made me worry immensely. You probably want to ask me what made me want to go overseas with Damon. The absolute truth of the matter is that I did not want to travel with someone whom I did not know well, and certainly not somebody who did not know me at all. Furthermore, it would be illogical to keep the company of anyone whose personal habits were unknown. However, during one morning's chance meeting with him, while generally speaking about my travels to different countries, I mentioned how much I would love to revisit significant places of antiquity around the world. For instance, going to Egypt or to Peru again would be an excellent idea. He smiled and said, "Professore, I was thinking the same, like going to America and to Israel." Then he immediately added, "Since you went to places like Peru and met Shirley, like in that movie, what was it called? You know what I mean. I like that movie, and I think it was you, the artist she was talking to, He was very excited about what he thought was right. But what if I was only an artist Shirley had met when I was staying in Los Angeles, and nothing more? What if I was not the artist she met and spent time with in Peru? He was the type of person who believed that whatever he thought had to be true. Yes, I met Shirley on occasions. However, what she portrayed in her book, which became a feature film, contains elements about that artist which were not in my personal experience. One could not explain anything to Damon, for he always had to be right, and the scenario created by him in regard to me was that I had to be the artist portrayed in that film, the one teaching Shirley a few unusual facts. But was she not already knowledgeable in the first instance? The actual truth was different than what he was exaggerating regarding my position in her life. Indeed, I met her from time to time when she was keenly purchasing my drawings, as she did with other artists, and she might have given them to her friends as a gift. I had not developed a deep relationship with her, and certainly not because she was a famous actress. Personally, I respect everybody and never force myself into other people's lives. Whenever an opportunity arises, I always aim to be frank with everybody in regard to what I feel about world events and the realities of life. Besides, after all these years, she might have forgotten that we ever met. Therefore, it was unimportant, and I preferred to leave it to a future meeting when we might be able to reminisce memories of the past. I had also been drawing many caricatures, which I gave to people like a calling card. I preferred to be concerned about more important issues of life. During my meditational sessions, which I conducted with friends, there were many inspirational considerations. In fact, I would like to go a few steps further and declare that we are not the only inhabitants of this beautiful world. There are other life streams, although invisible to the human race, but which are quite capable of corresponding with us in telepathic or inspirational ways. I am certain that I have experienced it, and that made me very aware and extremely cautious about what has been indirectly or directly relayed over the years. I always aspired to present the wisdoms provided to me to people in a manner which were more acceptable for human understanding, respecting everyone with all their beliefs and viewpoints. Indeed, all the knowledge gained throughout the years and my open-mindedness to information from all sources has been a great help. I have learned that there is no limitation to the acquisition of knowledge. This is the reality, and it takes some confidence and courage to express one's wisdom and knowledge to others. It is like gathering treasures upon the pathways of life and sharing them with friends. I always endeavor to tell my students studying psychology or art that this was one way to grow and become our best. It is true that some of us are more knowledgeable in regard to the realities we must face within our lives. In the past, and until now, although sensed it has not been fully understood due to man's belief systems, created by themselves in search of wisdom and their need to know why things were the way they are. The stories about heaven and earth, the realms beyond the known physical realities, and the actual physical reality, as currently experienced, has only been interpreted within man's own dreams, fantasies, myths, and religious viewpoints. They might have occupied man's mind for a number of centuries, perhaps in an endeavor to find reasonable answers to his questions in search of the truth. Regrettably, it seems that their great efforts eventually led them to develop dogma. But, like his evolution being multidimensional, as with his physical realities, man believes in what he follows, and therefore his quest to know becomes more sophisticated. Modern man needs to know, and from time to time his beliefs are being challenged. His religious concepts need to be altered in line with the deepening understanding. Even during the early parts of the 21st century, a disclosure needed to take place. Man's evolution cannot be interrupted anywhere within the known universe, as with the multidimensional realities he is part of. Admittedly, man's spiritual horizons are expanding, and his old habitual thought patterns are becoming increasingly more difficult to shake off. Yet he still fantasizes that all his religious and antiquated ideals are the only truth. Nonetheless, in the end, he needs to be awakened to the real truth, that he is not what he was led to believe he is. Man has been, and still is, living in the reality of a multiverse, and is part of a multidimensional existence. Consider man's ability to think, his feelings, his awareness, and experiences within physical existence. How many of you have ever considered that your current realities could not be the only ones? How many of you never considered the possibility of a life eternal and stumbled at your current experience of the physical reality? Why do you think that there may be an eternal life? Is it only a feeling and nothing more? Why do you think that your yearnings have steered the way to your current fantasies of a supreme authority you view as the ultimate force, which created you, tested you for a long time, and punishes you forever? Perhaps it is time to consider logic beyond your own. The time has come for us to start thinking in an unbiased way and begin to cease limiting ourselves to see only fantasized elements of life, while at the same time becoming aware of realities. Use your imagination if necessary as a tool, just the same as your great scientists and philosophers have done for centuries, and you will certainly grow. Wake up to the call you sense all around you. Look at the signs in your world: confusions, violence, and increasing aerial activity in your skies. The debate continues. When I was a child, I used to think that I, the observer, was behind an animated mask, but I was the one animating it at will. It was also my body glove, through which I was observing everything around me, while my real self and actuality was elsewhere. This is where I was permanent, unlike my physicality mask, and moving in all directions all the time. As I matured, I discovered that I was more open to the observed reality, spending less time within the actuality where I was permanent and free. I always believed that we are all capable of altering things, but as I matured, my observed reality became more like a fixed one. I still feel that I am behind that mask, animating it at will, but not fully able to alter any part of it. However, I also discovered that I could make changes to my DNA, my universal essence, but it became harder as I matured. When I was a new arrival in the world, in other words, when I was a child, I could manifest different outcomes and events effortlessly, but when I became an adult, everything I knew changed to a reality of impossible imaginings due to multiple dream scenarios which we all seem to share and accept as being the only reality of our adult years. Consider the religious indoctrinations we have been subjected to throughout the centuries. It becomes more and more unreal when the observer spends a long while within what is virtual and simulated as a result of observation. I still question what really determines the actuality of observed reality. When I stand in front of a tree, I cannot see it until I actually look at it, but when I close my eyes, if I am magically transported to somewhere else, on opening my eyes in that state, I might still expect to see the tree I was previously looking at. That tree remains as an impression in my mind, which I can describe. After opening my eyes, I would expect the tree to be there, and my mind would feel comfortable, knowing that the tree was still visible. Just knowing that the tree is there creates the impression of reality. If I had wanted it to go away when I opened my eyes, I would find that I had not been successful, for the tree has not gone anywhere. What makes this actuality happen? What other elements can we consider, and what makes it physically solid to my senses? This is also a similarly shared experience for other observers. Then again, if what we consider as reality is a simulation, where is the headquarters or central control mechanism? This is what remains invisible to us while we experience the virtual as real. Perhaps we need to become more familiar with the actual reality to be able to make changes to our lifestyle, outcomes to events, establishment of good health, education, and wealth in this make-believe reality we are familiar with. Perhaps self-discovery in the real world would be a good start. Ever since my childhood, I have wondered about human nature and the world cultures we have learnt about, questioning their evolvement at every opportunity. This could have been the reason why I was perceived to be different from my very early days. Many of my close friends and relatives considered me as just a dreamer whose mind is above the clouds. This may be why I often felt the need to be left alone, to be able to think and ponder upon more positive and beautiful things of life. Having chosen to live in a part of the world where one was not discriminated against and was respected, I settled in Australia. To me, it was a land of wonders. Even when my wife and I separated due to circumstances I have detailed before, this land remained my home. You may consider it as being like a love affair with Australia. Damon commissioned me to paint large murals for him, a huge seascape, interior and exterior images of Pleiadian and intergalactic craft, as well as portraits of travelers like Mayan, Taygeta, and Soltec. Some imagination would suffice. After discovering my intention to travel to Egypt and Peru, he decided to share the journey, encouraging me to take his generous offer of paying any excess to make the experience first class, and suggested that I could either pay him later or create a few more pieces of art instead. We experienced a few unexpected sightings of spacebound craft, which are generally not identifiable at first glance. However, the most important issue for me still remained. research into new discoveries of antiquity, although Damon's interest was only based upon meeting our space brothers and being taken into their craft with his own personal agenda. During this trip, which became most regrettable, there were too many questions to consider. They were mostly self-answered. Certain styles of emotional treatment of the most narcissistic and also extremely selfish kind had not been healthy, for they were relentless and very rough. Damon was always agitated, although momentarily calmed when he had little glimpses of spacecraft in Egypt and Peru. They could just have been natural occurrences. His entire journey was based on the finite knowledge of the film Out on a Limb, where he adored the main characters. I am not sure if one could liken our experience with that of Shirley and the artists portrayed therein. He insisted that everything was recorded, even the way one was treated had to be registered on the portable cassette recorder I took with me. He continually emphasized that other people had to realize that he was under nobody's influence, and anything experienced by him was through his own self-discovery. We were like chalk and cheese, from totally different backgrounds, upbringing, education, and viewpoints, and at times completely opposite to each other. In my meditations by listening to my childhood friend, who some may consider as my possible alter ego and unconscious self, I felt happier and calmed. Even to this day, my experience remains something beyond imagination, and certainly beyond dreaming. However, my faithful childhood friend Serapis was very real to me, and despite all my studies in higher education, it did not change the situation. In fact, I was as I am today, and am very content with that. It does not interfere with my decisions, studying, or undertaking any activity. Serapis remains not only a friend, but a great counselor and advisor. Damon, on the other hand, was relentless in his desire to change people's minds if he was given the Kabbalistic keys, considering himself God's only chosen. He regarded this as giving him the right to command everybody and meet those space brothers. Is it not ironic that many seem to prefer to deny their existence or regard them merely as a mass hallucination? It would be unwise to conclude that they were purposefully created myths to make the general public believe that what they observed was non-existent. There are also those who consider that others visiting Earth are intending to civilize our world, but one needs to ask why, and for what reason are they here? Once again, my age-old questions were beginning to surface. Where did humans really originate from? What about the processes of life and death? Is there truly a reincarnation, and are we forever recycled? The subject of the universe is not clear. Within all the chaos and disharmony experienced in today's world, many are still expecting a Messiah to come and wipe off the sins of humanity. Interestingly, some of those beings from elsewhere, imagined or real, have shared their wisdom, which man needs to be cognizant of to advance. They might have done so from very early days. However, we are yet to discover if it was recorded. And if so, was it kept hidden for some unknown reason? This is what some learned men and researchers all around the civilized world consider. We need to realize that when someone speaks of the truth, as perceived by people in a world filled with irrelevant stories, contrary to historical facts, it is usually followed by bitter criticisms. Even I could complain for being opposed and subjected to all kinds of ill thought. The same as others with similar ideals, but I prefer to make it a study instead. When we open-mindedly ponder upon what is observed in the world, we soon realize that the whole world needs to change. knowing that we cannot do it alone. During this part of my adventure, the very first thing one discovered was how dependent Damon was on habit-forming herbs, while endlessly bombarding me with utterly irrelevant issues. There was undoubtedly a thorough and discreet observation needed to be conducted in regard to his mental health. My need to feel a sense of discovery and look into articles of antiquity was completely ignored or laughed at. I was so glad to have had meaningful conversations with Serapis during my contemplations, although he was considered by many as being elusive, and I was regarded as an eccentric. Many of my associates considered this as fantasy. However, it was my personal experience, without suffering any ill effect. It helped me question the authenticity of former teachings we had been subjected to. I had to frequently break away from thoughts construed and memories recalled when I was abruptly interrupted, just to respond to extraneous and meaningless queries which remained unsatisfying, leading to Damon's downgrading of my characteristics. Later I needed to pick up the broken pieces to make some sense of it, while my mind struggled to escape, my conscious awareness wanting to run away for a long while. I was simply enduring this journey with him. In truth, I was forever interrogated, shouted at, sawn at on a daily basis. Did I need to be questioned about my good friends having left me to misery and want? I was no longer free even to think and be myself. The situation had become an enormous challenge, even under the umbrella of psychology. How could good friends want to change who I was, considering me perhaps an abnormal curiosum? A long time ago, I was told by my cousins, "You are different, you can't survive the world." What was I to do with my life if I listened to them? It was far better for me to remain within my own cocoon, for whenever I attempted to emerge from it, I was often subjected almost immediately to opposing attitudes from others. But I remained unstirred. However, spending any time with someone like Damon was devastating, and I was beginning to develop trends of self-doubt and uncertainty. Through discreet and silent meditations, by jotting down my experiences and looking at them under the microscope objectively, I was determined to survive these testing times. Damon was excessively critical about imagination and philosophy, although he admitted that he had no imagination and strongly believed in his personal philosophies. He continually maintained he was very good at his own philosophies, while also demanding that I should deny everything I have studied, for in his eyes I was going the wrong way. The whole situation looked more and more outrageous and ridiculous. Some of his behavior reminded me of my pretentiously intelligent cousins, with their suggestions about how I should live, but they were very young then. My thoughts were not mere fantasies, as they popularly considered them to be, for they were not based upon a blend of remembered dreams. My memories of being physically taken to distant places were real, places where the actual history of a wonderful planet was recalled. Yet I always questioned how much of it was correct. My experience of astral journeying when in Stuttgart, my extraordinary trip into distances in a spacefaring vehicle with other friends, and my wife when in Hobart, was not imagined, as I have previously documented. Some of the discussions I had with Damon at first appeared to sound reasonably intellectual when he asked me about the history of humanity and races on Earth. I spoke to him about how humanity had started according to academic study and how pictographs were developed, leading them to better communicate with each other, and how the races could have developed, as simply as I could. We spoke about the Israelites, Greeks, Romans, Asians, and Indians. Occasionally we mentioned the Nazi occupation of Europe, the concentration camps, and how humanity has lost its humanness as the years rolled by. During those debates, Damon continually rolled more cigarettes containing his grass, which he desperately needed, and was unable to accept the reason why I did not participate. A psychic artist, Marion Ruffin, had once painted a spirit guide portrait for him, depicting a Tibetan monk bearing the name Magoya, probably invented by her. This guide was allegedly putting ideas in Damon's mind when he had a few interesting questions. No matter what has been spoken about, he had the tendency to twist the conversation by asking something totally irrelevant. However, we have been able to talk on how those colorful races came to be, he questioning if they came from other planets. Who could guess what he had been told previously, and his private psychic, Christie, was often mentioned. In regard to aerial phenomena observed everywhere around the globe, which he ardently questioned, we need to ask ourselves like Brinsley Le Trench and his contemporaries did back in the 1960s. Can we really be alone in the universe? Our sciences tell us that the universe is populated by a multitude of galaxies, solar systems, and many habitable planets. We now realize that the entire universe cannot be empty. Therefore, it is only logical to consider that those others from elsewhere have been involved with humanity throughout history. Perhaps those from elsewhere are just like the humans living on Earth. And if this is true, we should be able to communicate with them. One may need to discover his own place in the real world first. One needs to acknowledge that there is enough evidence proving the existence of a close relationship between the world's belief systems and so-called aliens from elsewhere. If one still desires to view all of this as fantasy, one needs to understand that many of man's belief systems are also based on fantasies. Damon often jarringly intruded, demanding, "Well, when are they going to show themselves? Look, we came all the way. Will they now show themselves? Will they land? Will they pick us up?" He had the tendency of grabbing people's chins, as he also did to me, forcing me to look into his eyes. That was one of the ugliest assaults one can experience, but he did not see it as an assault, for it was apparently his tradition. If Serapis did not interfere mentally, speaking telepathically, that our so-called friend behaves like a child, wanting to have the first-hand experience on demand, I would certainly treat him more aggressively, and that would be completely against my nature. Upon hearing my verbalized thoughts, his friends will surely not believe him. He was highly agitated, shouting, "What do you mean, Suren? You think it's bullshit?" Or, he inevitably added, "There are things you know, but you don't tell me everything. Professore, why? Many people around the world claim to have seen UFOs reaching speeds of light, making sharp turns in the sky, and some have even photographed them, just like I did. I'd say they must be highly advanced." To which he exclaimed, Professore, they are gods." He was convinced that they knew everything needing to be known. When are they going to take us on board and let us meet their women? I tried to explain that no matter where they might have originated from, they all seem to follow the same pathways when we listen to people claiming to have seen them. But his response was always the same. "I know this is what I mean. It is what I was seeing on television." It would be so wonderful if we could speak of realities, even if it had some logic, when explaining aerial phenomena and how they traveled. I wished I was talking to my brother, who was a well-established physicist, but talking something like this to someone without any knowledge about gravitational and inertial fields and where those fields fluctuated was impossible. Whenever I verbalized my thoughts on some scientific subject or quoted from books I had read, the other stared blankly or immediately declared, Ah, Professore, it makes sense. This is what I mean. You know? This is what I mean. Maybe they are coming a little late. I told him that they were probably using very strong lights to move their vehicles in the sky, and his habitual response was, "Ah, lights. Yep, Professore. When will they come? When? When? Let us not forget that people are predisposed by their social status and are usually educated in contradictory ideals. Do unto others as you would like it to be done unto you. However, Damon repeatedly shouted, "Kick their butts so that they can do things for you. And, to succeed, you have to yell and shout at people." Worse still was that Damon thought of me as a go-between with higher intelligences. He was vehemently expecting me to produce an enormous wand in order to perform miracles, just like Moses or the wizards of old. Obviously, some people are lacking in wisdom, and others choose to be pretenders. Some believe everything they are told, while others put themselves on top of a pedestal, hoping to be worshipped. I have seen many examples of this. Consider the witnesses, and now Damon. Self-discovery may help. Remember, there are those who belong to a thoroughly hated breed, simply because they are different. Others are stuck in their beliefs. People first need to step out of their shells and be free. Unfortunately, many are still being told not to go outside their own circles, for they are instructed there is desolation and destruction out there. Have they ever been outside before preaching others not to do so? Let us also remember that the world's history endlessly repeats. There have been a great number of prophets in man's past, and even the Bible is full of their stories, predicting doom and gloom. Wesley Le Trench, in his book Operation Earth, makes mention of this very issue some others prefer to ignore. What we observe today has happened before, as one can discover when studying the past intently. Perhaps we do not need to go looking for the proof of circumstances towards what such prophecies point at. Will there be a way out? Will there be a period of true peace on earth? Can we expect major changes in our lives? Ancient records show that those from elsewhere were overseeing the ancient cultures, and the tradition of extraterrestrial visits to Earth is not new. Ancient artists have also painted them in their masterpieces. According to Bible wisdom, and what people like Jehovah's Witnesses have been preaching for decades, Christ is going to throw the devil into prison for 1,000 years at the time of Armageddon, and the faithful will be saved and resurrected. Until that time has expired, when he will test the faithful one last time. It is written, "And when the 1,000 years are finished, Lucifer shall be loosed." However, one would like to believe that the earth of today is being observed and helped directly or indirectly by those from other realms. According to current information, there are those who are diligently interacting with extraterrestrials, some of whom are apparently already living amongst us. Jacques Vallée speaks of many unsolved cases regarding UFO phenomenon and interstellar people in his book Anatomy of a Phenomenon. Whereas Janet and Colin Bard ask, "Are we really alone?" in their book Life Beyond Planet Earth. The question remains. Proverbs of Solomon, chapter 10, verse 21 states, "The lips of the righteous feed many, but the foolish die for the lack of understanding." When I started my unfortunate journey in November 1996, for the duration of a little over a month, it was not ideally anticipated, although some of my discoveries might have carried more weight as to the importance of knowledge gleaned from a variety of sources, had it not been for the circumstances forced upon me. I found great truth in the words of that young Jewish man at Damon's. My intention was to decipher some of the ancient texts and conduct research into other matters of interest, but I was constantly reminded that at the end I would regret the day I was born. In reality, this journey has been rich with much mistreatment. Once again, it was proven to me, true friends are like diamonds, precious and rare. False friends are like autumn leaves, found everywhere. We flew from Melbourne to Sydney, followed by an overnight stopover in Bangkok and a long flight to Athens. Then we took another flight in a derelict Greek Airbus to Cairo, Egypt, where we shared a partially organized program. Later, we flew from Cairo to Frankfurt and to Los Angeles, followed by a trip to Peru. However, only after returning home could I enjoy the sounds and images I had captured with my recording equipment and cameras, whereas during the actual journey it was extremely difficult to do anything in Damon's presence. Spending even an hour with him was most trying, and he was beginning to emotionally hurt me by not giving me a chance to think, for I had been forced to answer his thousandfold repeated questions, enduring his inappropriate mannerisms and unethical behavior. Whenever I had any opportunity, I was the happiest man in the world, for I could at least ponder on more positive thoughts, often as inspired. Every single individual living on earth deserves every joy and happiness, even when one is forever being criticized by someone who they traveled with. Damon could not accept anything else other than his ways being the only reality. The majority of my nights were stolen away by unnecessary debates I was forced to endure. Whenever I had a chance in the late night hours, I sat silently in a corner and recorded my impressions of the day, occasionally as inspired by other benevolent but invisible friends. It is also possible that I was inspired by another aspect or counterpart of myself from elsewhere. I was continually chastised for my wrong ways of living, enduring severe abuse in words and rough mannerisms. One could perhaps forgive him, but it did not excuse his behavior. Nobody's behavior should control anybody. We all have the strength and wisdom to do so on our own. It is more important to be accepted than to be always self-righteous. To always be happy cannot be possible until we are able to love and accept who we are and where we are at. When in the plane, Damon continued to preach. From a business point of our trip, he was extraordinarily excited and wanted to have something tangible so that he could tell his friends back home he had seen them. Obviously, the reason for his traveling was only to see UFOs. Otherwise, why do you take me there? Prior to this trip, I had given him some recordings I made in regard to visitors like Alizantil and friends in space and on Earth as a story with an important moral issue. He was keenly interested in the subject matter. Food offered on the plane was of no importance to him, and one could hear him shout, "Guys, Serapisi, Mayan, Alizantil, all of them. They have to show me something, proving a lot of philosophy." After a short pause, he would continue with his song, "But I'm very good with philosophy." I was incessantly advised not to waste any of my films or audio tapes while I recorded the ambience or speaking my inspired thoughts into them. I did not realize that they were only reserved for our more important considerations. Our so-called conversations became very fiery and hurtful. There was an atmosphere of resent all the time, Damon was also an excessively indecisive individual. If he made a decision, it would, for some unfathomable reason, be followed by undoing it. He would start a project and soon after stop it, often unadvised from his invisible guardian when having his shower in the morning. Advising me unendingly, he repeated over and over, "There are 3 things people seek for and kill each other for. They are beauty, intelligence, and money. And I have got all 3. Alas, I had to respond to him forever. What did they say? Did Shirley get anything when she came home? Did she say, "Yes, I saw," other than what they showed her in the car? I could only extremely cautiously respond, but he never listened, instead butting in. Forget about it. She was freaking out. One could only appear as if agreeing with him. These words are exactly as they have been spoken in my recordings. No, the movie actor, taking her from here and going again from there to the other place. Of course, it's not making any business. After a pause, I'm telling you, if I am not happy, if nothing happens. They know the time for us. Look, we don't ask. We tell them that we want something. Anything intellectually spoken was invariably followed by something else to make one feel embarrassed for being an intellectual. I was bombarded with, "What do they say? I don't know what you know. I am much stronger than what they think. Much stronger. Serapis can understand." While the flight was progressing, and when he finally decided to move to the opposite side of the cabin to sleep, I felt relieved. In reality, I enjoyed my aloneness, to be able to have a little quiet time. I could now take photographs from the windows next to which I was seated. It was then I noticed a number of colorful lights outside and took several pictures of the spectacle, also videoing them. However, when he was awake, upon my telling him about the good news, he was frustrated, shouting at me, "Why didn't you wake me up? Why? Why?" In fact, I had tried, but he would not wake up, and I did not want to miss the opportunity. I was regarded as only talking to members of the invisible realm. That was perhaps the reason why he always questioned me. "What did they tell you? You were talking to them." I felt constantly obliged to respond, hoping that something exciting would happen soon. There have been a number of UFO hotspots throughout Australia which still remain active, let alone the well-documented Westall High School incident on 6th of April 1966 near Melbourne. Many such events have for some reason been silenced by certain authorities, and the people witnessing them advised to think that what they have seen was either illusionary or did not exist. Even a large number of students and their teachers were forced not to mention anything to anybody, although they had all seen something unusual, something physical, and not of any Earth-related technology. Maybe one needed not to go overseas to witness such a phenomenon after all. Again, in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 12, one reads, "He that despiseth his neighbor is void of wisdom, but a man of understanding holdeth his peace." Although not at all religiously inclined, I have to agree with this. Damon often declared, "Everybody listens to successful people. To be successful, you must have plenty of money, you must be intelligent, and charming." However, no matter how tired and exhausted one might have felt, it seemed his unending lectures on his personal philosophies and advice carried more weight through the night hours and whenever he chose. He literally believed he owned people. Repeating himself often, he advised me, "If I don't see anything, just having a good time, just talking, just discovering things and finding things out. God forbid what I will do. I was continually subjected to these kinds of threats from the moment we set foot in the airport. On the other hand, he was introducing himself to others as the Son of God and a spoiled brat at that. Professore, if you want to be famous, you got to be very good or very bad. When you are good, everybody thinks of you. But when you are bad, nobody forgets you. He had a fixed idea of obtaining a stick, or perhaps a wand, for apparently the old patriarch Moses had one, and Damon had to see UFOs, demanding to be taken aboard. He believed he could command those traversing space and time to come down whenever he desired due to his being very successful. On the way to Europe, we experienced a few mild turbulences on board the aeroplane, but the discordance one was forced to endure with Damon was more overpowering. I was happy when he decided to sleep on the opposite side of the cabin. That is when I could at least contemplate, have some solace, and concentrate on my own inspirational thoughts. Again I became aware of the dancing lights outside in the vastness of expanse during the night. I could not wake him, and indeed did not want to. I was not imagining those oblong and spherical lights outside the plane, and I have been able to capture them on film. I was almost mesmerized by their colorful display. They kept dancing while maintaining a cine-wave pattern. As they did so, their bright lights streamed through the unshuttered windows, creating a scene over the passengers' heads, a visual spectacle like the sun's rays in the morning, but there was no sunrise at the time. There were not any of the glorious red and orange glows when the sun sets, but blue, white, purple, and greens. It was so amazing to see how people ignored such an unexpected phenomenon. I still wondered, was I really seeing what was experienced, and felt the need to verify it by asking the stewardess what she thought they were. My questions remained unanswered for a while. Did I need to take it as confirmation, or what I observed also being visible to others, but were under instruction to ignore it? When one of them offered me a cool glass of mineral water, I told her that there was probably going to be another sighting of a similar kind within the next hour or so. I was unsure why I said that, and hoped she was not going to think of me as weird. When the experience was repeated as I predicted, one of the hostesses came to me to say that these things have been happening often, but we did not take them very seriously. We both smiled. Soon after I heard a voice and thought somebody behind was talking to me. Was it my earphones, perhaps? But it was neither. I did not have earphones on, and Damon was fast asleep at the time. A short while later, the voice became clearer. What you have seen was just for you. I responded with, Why me? Then I thought that perhaps I was so tired that hearing voices was an indication that I should fall asleep soon, while there was an opportunity to do so. Maybe my brain was already in an alpha phase, and I was already dreaming. Then again, how could it be, without even closing my eyes, and still completely aware of my environment and the ever-present engine noise? I remembered for a brief moment attending UFO club meetings over the years and hearing other people's stories. One of my friends was a commercial pilot, and we used to meet from time to time. He and his wife told me about their unusual experiences when flying, but they avoided talking about the incidents they witnessed to anybody due to fear of being ridiculed or considered as UFO-minded eccentrics. Such events have often been registered on radar and reported by many people from all around the world. When Damon woke up, one had to endure a string of illogical debates. He started asking me why I chose misery, desolation, and unhappiness, or why I preferred to live in the mud instead of living in an artistic and elite environment like he did. I was even graciously told that it was really stupid on my part giving away my all to my ex-wife and children, in the process rendering myself very poor. Why Serapis Bey did not make me rich like his guardian angel Megoya? Why, Professore? Why? When in Bangkok, our entire stay was completely ruined, primarily because he did not want to go anywhere and see anything of this great historic city, preferring to stay within the hotel complex called Amari to literally interrogate me. Although physically and mentally exhausted, I found myself answering his unthought-of and endlessly repeated questions just to keep the peace. It seemed he believed that I was obliged to respond to him as a friend. But was he really a friend, as he claimed? Even when I was falling asleep, he often had a few more questions, leaving me no time to relax and replenish myself. Oh, how much I needed to doze off for at least 10 to 15 minutes. During this time of our supposed conversation, he kept smoking his so-called herbal mixes. The entire day was spent talking about his great achievements as a businessman, complaining about his partners who attempted to cheat him, his philosophies, followed by criticizing my lifestyle. They were, as he called them, spiritual values. I wished he would give me a little break for a few short minutes to rest before making our way to the airport. Alas, we had to continue with our so-called spiritual debates as seen fit by him all night through. Whenever I had an opportunity to escape to the restrooms, I spoke all my impressions onto the tape recorder in some trepidation, hopefully not being discovered recording, for it would end up with me being chastised again. I would most certainly be renamed as an idiot, or make me feel like a guilty teenager. During the late hours of the night, Damon kept lecturing me while seated in the hotel restaurant. I was told I was going to see things, meet people, encounter craft, and meet this gorgeous girl. What's going to be my gift, Professore? Remember, I am the Son of God, and I deserve it. He was obviously told by Christie that he was going to travel with someone special and was going to receive an extraordinary gift. That someone special had to be me. He hoped to be given a spacecraft or UFO for his personal use, and a stick, for he was very rich and successful. He, like a few other people, was taking the words of psychics as gospel, therefore making it very hard to explain anything to him. Once I gave him a bracelet I found very early one morning on the steps of my dwelling, and I had no idea where it came from, thinking that it was deliberately put there, ultimately to be given to Damon. It was made of pure silver and had unusual signs inside. On the other hand, maybe it was a gift from an unknown source, and was intended for me, but I never wore anything like that, or even purchased one. Maybe it was to assist me to enjoy some peace. Damon had also heard about some of my experiments in regard to mind over matter, but being a skeptic, I did not take things lightly and conducted further experiments to discover the reality of things. He did not know that. It is true that thought can influence molecules of substances, such as water, as it has been tested by a number of other scientists. I also had my share in doing so. I was intending to conduct a similar test, but with photographic film. I mentioned to him that friends at home were going to take photographs using their equipment with fresh sets of unused negative films, while I transmitted my own image, or things I was looking at, to be included as extras in their pictures, although unsure about the expected outcome. I was going to do it either from Greece or Egypt by conducting spatially designed meditations. He immediately demanded, I want to be included in them also. In the circumstances, I contemplated returning back home immediately when in Europe, but did not. I should have noticed the warning signals long before, especially when he claimed, "A good artist is a dead artist. Look, the vision I got 2 months ago, remember I told you this morning? There's no doubt in my mind that I was taken to the pyramids. There's no way that I've been taken to the pyramids that night. There is no way," Damon continued with his wisdom, explaining that, as he remembered, he was opening something, shoving things around, and he did not know anything before going inside. Suddenly, and out of the blue, shouting something totally different, he continued with his outburst. I was compelled to explain things in relation to his relentless questions. I spoke about other dimensions, different universes, other possible civilizations, and their technologies. It has always been very strange and very tiresome to jump from one subject to another while trying to keep track of his mood swings in order to keep relative peace. The other often raised his voice to say, "I was bashing my brains for the last 5 years for this." Whatever it was is anyone's guess. Another time he shouted, "No, you see, I think they are putting all those questions in your mouth in order for me to answer, as if I don't want to see them. Because this is not the words I say. This is coming from somewhere else. From somewhere else, you understand?" He often emphasized that he never visited places of interest, nor had any contact with the locals, preferring to remain within his own circle of friends, rolling joints, talking over personal issues. To change their minds, Moses had this stick to do things with. It's important to show how it's done. That's what the people could look at. In a different part of his important lecture he propounded, "Our little friend Ani, the little pharaoh, is waiting for us there in Cairo. That's how I believe, because I was dreaming about him. I'm seeing him, like, as coming from the sky and saying hi to me, calling my name and disappearing. Almost on a daily basis he would repeat, 'You see, people couldn't see the idea. Here is a good-looking guy, an intelligent guy, and had plenty of money. They could kill someone like him. They all look for those things, money and looks and intelligence. Someone will be jealous.'" He felt the need to proudly boast about his generous nature. He spoke about his experience with a blue-eyed gorgeous girl in Bali at the beach. As I had recorded all those lectures on his demand, listening to them with a new freshness, I was hearing him say how frightened he was when he had all kinds of hallucinates on the table, and his friend introduced him to her, who later borrowed $10,000 from him. But Damon told her she had to go to Melbourne to get the money. Although it was a lot of money, on Christie's advice, he decided not to demand its return. "I finished my duty with this lady. Perhaps she helped me in one of my past lives, when we were slaves or something. Christie told me." We were jumping from one subject to another, like on a springboard. "Suren, I remember myself 5 years ago. when I may be intelligent, but did not have much knowledge about what I have today. No matter what the subject, it was constantly interrupted by Damon advising me how I should live. We start with some power, and show them this, and this, and this. I don't know what. I expect them to know everything. If they know my future, they should know everything. This would make anybody wonder what we were really talking about. All I can tell you now is that shortly afterwards the subject was changed, and we were speaking about the prophecies of Nostradamus, followed by Damon's predictions. Starvation is one of the things. It's coming to the west, to the west. Then he shouted again, "This is all good for a book, Suren. This is all good for a book. I want to see them. Until then, that's it. You will know." After a short pause, for he had to take yet another puff of his herbal mix, he continued, telling me that he did not expect Mayan to step in front of him when she came. "Before I left, everybody came to me and said, 'All I want you to tell us is it or isn't it? That's all.'" I was forced to listen to his great wisdom unceasingly. "Unless you come and say, and that is my philosophy everybody knows now, I know where to start for people to be shown, not to show them bullshit, but show them what I see. I don't want to talk. All I want is to show them. I want to be able to tell them also, not just to show." Another of his amazing philosophies was again expressed in his wise words. "Look, I live in a crazy world of money. Money is power. That is the world I come from. You are an artist. You talk to people on the same level. I don't. I argue, I shout, and I scream at people in order to get something. Something is protecting me, but I don't know what." While on flight to Athens, Damon asked me to request our friends to put doubts in their minds, but I could not fathom whose minds he was referring to. After some while, it transpired that he wanted doubts to be put in his neighbors' minds, so that his house was protected. Maybe, as he often told me, I was too slow in understanding things, and therefore he felt the need to repeat himself. During this portion of the journey, I believe I experienced astral projections when I was finally left alone for short periods during the night. We were to arrive in Athens in approximately 9 hours and 50 minutes. As usual, while the crew demonstrated safety precautions, Damon managed to relentlessly throw his vitally important questions at me, thus helping one to thoroughly regret undertaking this journey with him. When he decided to drift into sleep and the cabin lights were dimmed, I witnessed one other sighting of brilliant lights outside the aeroplane from my window. A born skeptic, I questioned their authenticity. When hearing some young people and children asking each other, "Did you see that?" I felt happier, knowing I was not hallucinating. Some flight attendants appeared mildly perturbed, but I was not going to be bothered by that, not even desirous to question anybody. I took a few more photographs of those dancing lights, without any concern about the outcome. I was tired, and was not quite certain whether a beam of light was directed to us or not. Maybe I was dreaming, but how could that be when I was completely aware of the environment, the seat I was sitting on, and the natural ambience of the aeroplane? I anxiously glanced in the direction where Damon slept, and then suddenly became aware of a male voice talking to me as if it was right inside my head. The voice assured me that I should not worry unduly, for nobody was going to disturb me. This time I thought it was a semi-conscious sleep and gradually drifting. A very unusual experience indeed. At first it did not make much sense, yet I was willing to record my experience somehow, without realizing that I could probably only record the ever-present noise inside. Maybe, I pondered, I might be talking in my sleep, and the equipment would record it. It was also to have evidence of how I might have been questioned by the other, for he had the habit of doing so while I was sleeping. However, can one imagine how blissful it felt without being chastised for a change and having my assumed ways corrected? All at once I found myself looking at a bright, round light ahead, yet I could not feel myself inside the aeroplane for a moment, and was aware of distant voices without the engine noise, and they were talking to me. During my childhood I used to debate all kinds of things. For example, how did we, the humans, come about? The Bible stories never made any sense. How could a loving God destroy the entire world with a great flood? Were we brought here from intergalactic space? According to the Holy Scriptures, God allegedly said, "Let us make man in our image." Who was he speaking to? I know I might have taken people aback by such questions. I heard my childhood friend's voice asking, "Remember the day you met those visitors in Hobart?" In fact, my ex-wife constantly debated this issue as being inspired by the all-powerful devil, asking if it was such a good idea to be married with a man who probably had mental health problems. A while later I found myself conversing with those voices from afar, debating the subjects of the first humans from Australopithecus to Homo erectus, Neanderthal man, unlike the biblical information. It was mentioned that Homo sapiens were not related to primates, and wherever humans lived, they always established some form of culture, and this was where current humanity developed from. However, what would the future of humanity be like? Bearing in mind how long it has taken humanity to develop into their current state, there are many unanswered questions. In reality, the evolution of man still remains the only logical conclusion. When we look into the ancient Sumerian inscriptions, we discover the existence of an advanced race from another realm known as the Anunnaki. And during their time, some automatons were created to tend the planet. Late Zechariah Sitchin wrote about them extensively. I heard about this for the very first time from one of my high school teachers, Mr. Chapolio, with whom we debated some of the characteristics of ancient cultures, Hittites, Babylonians, the disappearance of Sumerians for a period of time, and their sudden reappearance. A little later I found myself floating, gazing down upon my sleeping form. It felt so real and natural. I heard distant yet very beautiful music, which sounded like a choir humming an unknown tune, and in this state of consciousness I became aware of yet another indescribably beautiful source of light in the distance, drawing me almost magnetically towards it. I felt the presence of my childhood friend as we began gliding on an unusual pathway. I literally heard him say, "I want to show you something you will be surprised with." In that instant, a blue mist caught my attention ahead of us. The experience became more astounding when a strange-looking city made an appearance from the dissipating mist. Both of us were positioned on a platform, and it felt as if we were seated in front of an imposing entry, sparkling, indeed glowing, as the light reflected through its crystalline structure. The effect was stunning. Shortly afterwards we were floating above city buildings of the strangest kind, observing people of probably bygone days. Then we were shown stone and metal tablets with inscriptions, and there were many of them. I heard Serapis say, "As you will appreciate, only some similar texts have been found in Luxor and Saqqara, but not all have been deciphered." I never wanted this dream sequence to end. Our ponderings took us into subjects of space travelers, ancient gods like Baal, the god of thunder, and stories in regard to Zeus, Athena, and Typhon. Many of those Sumerian gods were similar, if not the same as the Greek gods and Titans. With this, I gradually became more aware of the interior of the aircraft and thought it was time to wake up, although I preferred to continue with my special outing. Upon opening my eyes, I noticed a bright object in the distance moving away. While sipping a glass of mineral water and softly speaking of my experience into the microphone, I looked anxiously in Damon's direction and wished he would not wake up for a long time. I felt a voice telling me in my head that we were going to have more sightings and more telepathic conversations from unfamiliar places. Maybe I was not quite awake yet. Maybe I was still dreaming. But I was assured that we were to be encountered one night in Cairo by the Sphinx, and later in Peru, where we might be involved in a meditation session with a group of people from other countries, speaking a few languages I was cognizant with. I questioned how things would develop with Damon, and their response was, "Leave it to us." Perhaps my imagining mind was creating a storyline as an escape route, but nevertheless it was a very pleasant experience. I was preoccupied with some colorful thoughts. For me, falling asleep had become difficult, since I had started this journey with Damon, who forever demanded my time. Fearful of being unexpectedly woken up from my slumber, just to answer a few more out-of-the-blue questions he had. When refreshments were served for those who were awake, and I happened to be one of them, I was still observing a display of colorful balls of light outside the aircraft. I commented into the microphone. Probably there was yet another culture before the Sumerians, and I believe the human world had a few remaining survivors from a long time ago. Remembering the ancestral background of Armenians being Sumerians, one tends to think of them being the real adventurers from other worlds. While gazing upon the eerie cloud formations, barely visible due to the lights of the aircraft, I became aware of Serapis speaking about the Epic of Gilgamesh. I had indeed read that poem. Many of the ancients' stories were told in poetic form, and one could easily draw parallels with concepts found in the Holy Scriptures and the fragments of tablets housed in the Museum of Antiquities in Istanbul. In reality, just like Sitchin describes, scriptural wisdom replicates that which is found in those poems. As the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. We considered the beginnings of the known human culture, origins of music, early writing skills in bygone days, and the first laws they introduced. We pondered upon the Greek gods, and why people of old performed rituals to gain favor in the eyes of those deities. We reflected on the human emotions displayed by Zeus, Poseidon, Demeter, and Hades. We even questioned who those gods really were, and then made some constructive comparisons with scriptural wisdom. What a wonderful way to fall asleep! When the passengers started to stir in the early hours of the morning, I was fully awake from my slumber and mental musings, but the smell of tobacco, which started to fill the cabin, made me feel extremely breathless. Alas, Damon was a heavy smoker and had no understanding of the situation. As soon as he woke up, his relentless questions immediately began. "Why you don't sleep at all? You spend all night talking to yourself. Do you know what people think of you? Are you taking pictures?" I responded, "Yes, and there will be a wonderful sunrise when we arrive." Soon after we were offered a light breakfast, but he preferred to sleep. Damon and I were two different and certainly clashing personalities, both traveling with entirely different expectancies. I was exhausted with the thought that 1,000 further questions would follow me wherever I went. Although the flight crew did everything to entertain the passengers, my mind was not able to relax or be entertained with any of the films they were screening. Driving closer to Athens airport, Damon, barely opening his eyes, commented, "This is a very good movie." Was he sleeping at all? Was he enjoying any part of his travels? On arrival, in the early hours of the morning, at Athens airport, Damon started to display his usual self by being extremely agitated, for airports made him feel panicky. We changed money into drachmas and hired a taxi, but he could not wait to go out in great haste. We took a mini trip around the city in heavy traffic, passing through bazaars, and while stopping somewhere, an elderly lady approached us and was harshly spoken to by the driver, who later revealed that the poor woman was begging. Later arriving at the Museum of Antiquities, we discovered that an Egyptian exhibition was being held there. When at the Acropolis, we encountered a number of schoolchildren and a group of tourists whose guide spoke of a certain Greek goddess who struck the rocks with a stick, and water had gushed forth. That angered Damon enormously. "That was only reserved to Moses." He immediately demanded to be given such a stick. "I came all this way. I only hope they are going to make themselves appear and will not screw me up." He was overly argumentative, angry, and annoyed. "I'm very, very, very disappointed," he said, and kicked some of the stones on the ground, as well as a few statues. "What the fucking hell did I come here all the way for?" he yelled. "I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed. When are they going to give me my gift? They gave one to Shirley. So, where's my gift? Where is mine?" Due to my discomfort after a double hernia operation, my movements were a little slow until I fully recovered, and even the slightest exertion was still painful to me, but Damon constantly ignored my condition, commanding me with "walk," or at times with "walk, you bastard, walk, asshole, walk, walk." Afterwards he furthered, "You're telling me to feel and to sit on those seats where fucking gods were sitting, and telling me to feel the rocks? I didn't come here to feel the rocks. I came here to see Serapisi, Alizantrov. When are they going to land? They didn't bring me here for nothing. If they don't give me what I must have, God forbid, what will happen? God forbid, what will happen?" He repeated these words over and over again. The more this attitude continued, the more withdrawn I became. When the other felt hungry and wanted to eat something, I simply pretended that I had a bad stomach. Several hours later, back in the hotel, and after smoking his herbal mixes, Damon was a little calmer and said, "I think that is when things will start, and I will get my present then. Maybe this stick. I love this stick. Ah, Serapisi, Serapisi, Serapisi." Apparently he had been told by Christie that something was going to be touched in his head, enabling him to see the people of the invisible realm. His entire journey seemed to be influenced upon what this psychic had told him. However, as I have mentioned, one morning I woke up to find a sterling silver wrist clasp, inside of which were carved unusual emblems, and thinking that it was meant to be his. After those relentless demands, I had given it to him. He did not even thank me, and wonder if he has still got it. Our flight in a Greek Airbus to Cairo was indeed so shocking that it raised serious doubts regarding its airworthiness. The neglected interior, strange smells, and tattered seats did not paint a nice picture. After enduring an hour-long flight, on arrival at Cairo, we were met by Ahmed, a young Egyptian who was to help us with all the formalities. An organized shuttle bus took us first to a Swiss-owned luxurious hotel complex, the Mövenpick. The reception in Cairo was enough to forget the miserable flight we had just experienced. The people were generally very friendly. A quick visit to the pyramids was planned. Then to the Cairo Museum of Antiquities and the temples, later to be followed by yet another flight to join a Nile cruise before visiting the Aswan Dam. However, my recent experiences created a very ill-fated image. By then I knew that nothing was to be enjoyed, other than answering a plethora of questions totally irrelevant to matters of interest and of concern only for Damon. Wanting a craft to land, presents, and a magic wand, like that apparently given to Moses. That evening we were to be entertained by a laser light and sound show theatrically descriptive of the significance of the Sphinx, ancient rulers of the land and construction of the Great Pyramids. Damon was not interested in anything unless our friends made an appearance and landed in front of people, but for now it seemed he was more interested in seeing Ani and obtaining a quantity of hallucinates. It did not stop me observing the people of Cairo on the streets, fruit and jewelry vendors, spice traders, and a vast number of new model cars, camels, and many Sudanese walking tall on the dusty roads. The program was to be presented in several languages, and the English language presentation was a delight. I attempted to film much of the program professionally, but Damon constantly interfered, tapping on my shoulders to ask his myriad of ever-persistent questions. All the sounds and jitter caused by his actions were subsequently recorded. Against the background of prayer calls streaming from minarets, he constantly declared, "They've got a very specific task to look after us, mate." Speaking of Ani, he said, "He knows it means business for him, a successful business." Whatever that might have been was anybody's guess. He said he was intending to introduce Ani to some New Age understandings. A while later he was asking me if Serapisi had sex today, then joyfully exclaiming, "Ah, now the etheric is. I know what etheric is. It comes to us, yes? When you look at the sky, you see little sparks come to us, or—" Subjects constantly changed as Damon kept asking me his completely out-of-the-blue questions on all kinds of things, from reincarnation to becoming a logos. During the show, there had been an aerial display of a mechanical craft I believed to be from another dimension, unless, of course, some secret tests were conducted on behalf of a scientific community from around the world, as we are sometimes informed. It had a very peculiar effect on my films and sound recordings, but during the event people hardly noticed anything, perhaps considering it part of the show. Being utterly bored with everything cultural, Damon kept holding his head between his two fists, probably agonizing over his inability to interrupt me with his never-ending questions while I filmed. Ahmed met us after the show, but Damon was extremely anxious about meeting Ani in the hotel lobby for the vital items he desperately needed for his habit. Ahmed asked me repeatedly if videoing was my profession, and to remember him when I put the video on television. Damon demanded that Ahmed and his friends should remember to call on his divine name and Soren's, and they would be immediately healed. Not wanting to be included in his advice, I was shocked, for it was not my intention to present myself as a magician or prophet as Damon did. Did he by any chance realize how extreme he was? There was a desperate need to discreetly explain a few things to people. Alas, Damon kept demanding that we had to provide them with a number of miracles to show who we really were. Logically, this behavior was very childish, dependent on multiple reasons, and damage caused by his habitual use of hallucinogens. To keep the peace, I suggested that perhaps we could do one of my experiments in regard to mind over matter using photographic film, hopefully without considering it a miracle, for it was purely an experiment, during which the thoughts utilized could influence films or other digital media because of their electromagnetic characteristics. "Ah, but Professore," he responded, "I am included. I must be included. I am very, very special. Wait until they discover who we are." Annie had once lived in Melbourne and met me on occasions when visiting Damon. He advised Ahmed and others before our arrival that we were very special friends. This greatly appealed to Damon's vanity. When visiting Egypt in the past, I have endeavored to interpret some hieroglyphics. Discovering this, the tourist guides now ask me if I had studied in Egypt all those years ago. Damon was seemingly proud to associate with someone who knew many things, but in reality he felt the need to command somebody like me. Apparently in his eyes, we belonged to the chosen of God, who were persecuted by fanatics throughout the centuries. However, once again my professional background was misrepresented behind my back, and not as what it actually is. Instead, I was portrayed as a psychic, perhaps as a good replacement for his previous one. When we encountered a number of students and their teachers busy sketching artifacts at the museum, I decided to draw the portrait of a pharaoh of Egypt as I imagined, and presented their teacher with it. They were astounded and accepted my gift happily. Damon was ill-pleased, since I did not demand any payment for my gift, and he considered it something stupid on my part. I have definite reasons to believe that he thought he owned me, as with all his friends and associates. The other tour guide was Makram, who had to make changes to his identity and become a Muslim before becoming a commanding officer in the Egyptian army. He was originally an Armenian descent. To be able to survive and become what one desired in Muslim countries, one had to become like them before being accepted. He was happy to meet an educated Armenian and could not wait until introducing me to his mother, who had a gift shop next to the museum. But Damon preferred to have every opportune time for his questions to be answered by me. Makram was very surprised how pretentiously spiritual the other was. Alas, assuming himself belonging to the race named as the chosen of God, Damon used many abusive words against the locals, thus angering them. He was completely unaware of their intent to harm him as a result of his attitude. For my part, I felt obliged to speak to them discreetly in regard to his personal dilemmas, so that I could not be held responsible in any way for his undesired behavior and welfare on my return back to Australia. We were certainly unrelated to each other, not even friends. It was interesting to observe the situation, which would lead to forensic considerations when listening to the locals in their language. Makram, on the other hand, was very knowledgeable about the history and very proud of his adopted background. During the laser light and sound show by the pyramids, it was most annoying to continually hear, "Are our friends around? Are they going to make an appearance? Beam us up in front of all these people?" They indeed made a brief appearance, but he only nursed his head between his two fists while looking at the ground. I responded reservedly and said, "I don't know. We will see." I was obviously expected to relay his demand psychically to our friends from elsewhere. There was a constant feeling of agitation in the air, ready to lead to further conflicts and unnecessary arguments from his side. He kept saying, "Maybe we will see something." But no matter what the nature of those incessant questions were, I always tried to respond to them as seriously as possible, respecting him as an individual, although he never respected me. Humanity seems to have moved forward, and yet religious darkness did not make it any easier for the human race. In fact, this was one of the subjects I partially debated with Damon when considering the history of the world. Man's religions have caused so much bloodshed throughout his existence and carried too many false promises. After the show, we accompanied Ani and his friends, climbing sand dunes towards a particular rock, which Ani jokingly claimed to be his, and where we sat down. They enjoyed their peace pipes and bongs. However, being somewhat different, I did not participate in their activity of being human, as Damon proudly preached. Instead, I chose to admire the view and engaged in the not-so-human activity of taking photographs. From down below one heard the sounds of typical Egyptian music being performed for a wedding feast. It was a pleasant change to hear the familiar sounds of finger cymbals, kettle drums, and an Egyptian flute playing a tune, Dancing Eyes. Periodically, camel riders came asking for bakshish, similar to pocket money, and tea, while claiming they were the watchmen. Ani and his friends told them as locals to leave us alone. Damon was, as usual, very disillusioned, for the space friends had not yet come or shown themselves, let alone landed to take him up into their craft. I felt the urge to distance myself a little from the group with the excuse of taking more photographs, but in reality I had the distinct impression that Damon was planning to have me killed. For a moment I toyed with the idea of making my way to the airport, but I heard a very distinct voice talking to me. This was very unusual, because the entire group was enjoying their herbal mixes, and I was not. Yet wondered why I was having this kind of an effect. Maybe, I pondered, it was due to being physically and mentally fatigued. Was I perhaps hallucinating without sharing their human activity? Yet the insistent voice repeated in my head, "We are about 348 miles north above the city." I was surprised but not shocked as I repeated those words to record them. I knew then I had to tell Damon and the company that we were going to have a surprise visit. They all looked in my direction as if to say, "You must have lost your marbles." Damon jumped up, saying, "Are they?" Just as I thought I must be dreaming, I too was quite surprised with this event, and was going to capture whatever might be the case with my camera. I was previously told that they intended to make an appearance following a circumspect route, heading towards the Sphinx, and drawing closer to where the entire group was seated. There was most definitely a very electrifying feeling in the air. Damon and others were standing quietly for a few seconds when I told them that our friends were approaching. If nothing happened, they would all think that I had lost my mind altogether. To the left-hand side of the Sphinx, and almost towards the Great Pyramid, there appeared a very bright semi-spherical object, directing a beam of light towards us, and grew in size as it came closer, its mechanical details and other features apparent. One could easily observe its structure seen almost like two plates placed face to face on each other, bulging lights streaming from its main body, randomly flashing on and off around the rim. I drew Damon's attention to it, and he was more than ecstatic, more than surprised. In fact, very much shocked, because he was not really expecting it at that time. Our Egyptian associates were just as excited about the fantastic sighting, although one of them claimed it to be nothing more than an army helicopter. Soon Ani exclaimed, "No, this can't be. This can't be. It makes no sound." Then he suddenly shouted, "This is what I have heard about, but I have never, ever seen one. Not here, not in my hometown." It was a lot larger than a big army helicopter, and bigger still than a jumbo jet. Everyone, including Damon, was almost paralyzed with awe, and continued gazing upon this magnificent sight for several minutes. During this time, the craft remained extremely still, while its lights continued to randomly flash. I kept silent out of respect, whereas Damon was still not satisfied, and after a few seconds of silence, began to shout as per his usual habit. "We came all the way up here. Guys, guys, guys! They can pick us up, can't they?" Shortly afterwards I heard the now familiar voice in my head. "It is understood, and there's no obligation." I understood what was meant, but could not utter a word in that instant. I knew then that even if it was their intention in the first place to pick us up, in the circumstances they were not going to do so. Also, perhaps detection and possible military action needed to be avoided. Being able to converse with them was a very delightful and exciting experience for me. Although I could consider it as telepathy, I still questioned whether it was really a telepathic endeavor, or were they using a technology we were not familiar with. I did not talk to them audibly, although I was sure that I could. Instead, I chose to ask them mentally, "Would you do some interesting maneuvers for others to see, if it is agreeable on your side?" Again I understood that they agreed for me to tell the group, and so I told them, as uttered by the voice I was listening to, as if through good quality earphones. That amazed the members of the group immensely, and I felt the need to explain that our friends were doing what they did voluntarily, and not because I was asking them to do anything. They could make turns into any direction faster than any aircraft was able to. It was a phenomenon to behold. Shortly afterwards they quickly took off, zooming upwards in a 30 or 35-degree angle from where we stood. One could hear a few youngsters and children shouting in their native tongue, probably pointing at the sky. Look at that! Those lights in the sky!" Very electrifying indeed. One could also hear words like, "They are from jinns. Don't speak of them. You haven't seen them." Interestingly, some people were displaying uncontrolled fear. This reminded me of some cults we are familiar with. Take Jehovah's Witnesses, for example. They would traditionally consider such an event as being from the all-powerful devil. Ani was spellbound. "I suppose," he said, "these things happen everywhere, even here in my country. But I think we are not allowed to speak of it, in case we may look crazy." There was at least some sense of relief in my mind, hoping that there was going to be a little peace from thousands of negative questions, unthought of, and at times only guessed answers, accusative viewpoints, downgrading, blaming. Some time later Damon told me that Shirley treated the artist portrayed in the film in a certain way, and therefore I also needed to be treated likewise. "Do you blame me for it? Why did you bring me all the way here, when our friends, that is, if they are no more than bullshit, don't come and lend their craft? Why? Professore, why?" But what had he experienced at the rock next to the Sphinx that night? At least Ani and his friends were very happy with the experience, for they had all been very skeptical at first, and now they had seen the reality of an extraterrestrial spacecraft in their sky. If the circumstances were different, and he behaved appropriately, things could be different. He had the opportunity, but had blown it. In the morning we were to visit the pyramids, and a few more temples of interest. Many words uttered by Damon were very immature and hurtful. He was derisive when I photographed things at close proximity, e.g. flowers, or the coffee cup, and took pleasure in laughingly telling others about how slowly I ate, drank, or walked, and now this. Occasionally he attempted to put his clammy hands on my forehead, supposedly to heal me, so that I could speed up when eating and walking. How noble of him! Perhaps that was his so-called spirituality, encouraging him to do so out of his good-heartedness, or as he had learned from other psychics. Could those others around and his close associates see what was really going on between Damon and me? He considered it most important to spend more time with me. In reality, however, he wanted to forever interrogate someone who happened to be me, and for me to answer his thousandfold questions of no intrinsic value. He wanted me to agree with his nonsense all the time. Therefore, everything I did, such as photography or filming, he considered as wasting his time, and that was apparently a vitally important issue of concern to him. Additionally, he wanted to frighten me by saying he felt like dropping my cameras, later claiming that he was only joking. But was he? He was certainly very spiritual in his own eyes. As far as I was concerned, the day was only reserved to answering a plethora of unrelated questions and being treated as a wrongdoer in every aspect of my life. And night was the only time I could contemplate on more constructive thought and recalled memories, that is, whenever it was not stolen away from me. By concentrating, for example, on the history of the ancients, like the Persians, Ashur or Nineveh, and jotting down notes or recording my impressions, I was able to survive the endless trauma I was subjected to. After a night-time of peaceful thoughts, if I could not sleep properly, due to my mind being crowded with inconsequential issues Damon was interested in, or simply conversing about more interesting and intellectual subjects on my own with my invisible friends, I felt refreshed in the morning. One night, when I was falling into a restful sleep, I became aware of the laughter of children. However, this time I was not going to question anything, but simply go with the flow. I took it as part of my dreaming. Soon I found myself in a hall of huge proportions where there were all kinds of colorful people. A tall gentleman with pure white silvery hair, rather elongated forehead, and the deepest male voice I have ever heard, addressing the gathered, said, "Since we are back here." Was this perhaps one of the famous halls of learning? It was a place of light, and the people therein presented their own glowing perfection. This speaker never introduced himself. However, he started to talk about Moses, who was given special instructions to build a temple in the desert, and also that when King Solomon built the very first temple in Jerusalem, it was after the Lord had given him the wisdom. Then stood a slim-built person with the most beautifully glowing straight blonde hair, eyes golden, skin as smooth as marble, and dressed in a tight cerulean blue material, introducing himself as Abd. He explained about Ezekiel of the Bible, who was also given wisdom to erect a temple. The image of a certain Lord was portrayed, holding an object in one hand, pointing it towards a small point of light in the sky, upon which a vast number of stars became visible, and one was brighter. They were like the embossed objects I saw in the museums. I noticed another friend I knew as Soltec, whose portrait I once painted for Damon. Here everybody spoke in a very orderly fashion. They pointed at the reality of spacefaring vessels above the atmosphere and indeed spoke about them shining like stars at night. One bright star got my attention, and I asked about it, discovering that it was known as Gudea during ancient times. In fact, some aspects of history, as it was on planet Earth, were considered in detail. It felt like time travel into the past. Seeing some familiar faces made the experience even more worthwhile. The whole variety of subjects discussed included the Metal Age in Mesopotamia, medicine, and Ashurbanipal's great library. A number of questions arose. Why did man often reach a point where he misused his knowledge, therefore regressing upon this beautiful world they named Earth? Why did human history continually repeat? It was almost like recapping some of the literature one had read, and now repeating the information contained therein. It was certainly keeping my mind pleasantly occupied. Waking up on the 3rd of November, I decided to get ready very quickly and get out to the almost deserted restaurant to have a cup of coffee before wandering along the dusty roads nearby, for I desperately needed this time just for myself before the interminable questions began. As the morning advanced, we met our tour guides and visited other archaeological sites, while Damon kept pointing at certain signs, colors, and markings on the rock faces. "A face, and upper body I see there," he shouted. "Do you see it too? It is old style of Egyptians, I think, or?" The guides were puzzled by the non-existence of any interest in discovering anything on his part. Furthermore, we spoke about the step pyramids and mastabas, Pharaoh Cheops, Princess Neferhotep. Considering some of the historic information presented to us, one wondered whether all the history known so far was completely factual. From time to time, Damon wandered off into different directions with Ahmed. They were more interested in the vibrations they allegedly sensed by touch, as Damon instructed him. Muhammad Makram asked me if I psychically felt any treasures buried underfoot, where we happened to be, by the small pyramid, obliging me to concentrate and make a well-guessed suggestion. I told him what I felt, but one needed to dig deep and excavate. I had a very strong feeling that they had other chambers under the pyramidal side, let alone the Sphinx. In that instant, Ahmed and Damon approached us, saying, "Market, market!" Were they perhaps looking for treasures for themselves? Who could guess? Then again, this could lead to new discoveries. It was then that Damon told me, "Professore, look, we are sent to these people. When we give them the guidelines where to get those treasures, 50% goes to me." Later he raised his voice further. "You must remember us. We are your gods coming back to you." You can imagine what the others thought of him. Our footsteps echoed as we walked through the narrow corridors of the ancient city. It probably sounded like the tramping armies of the past. Makram pointed out the secret doors, which were opened every morning and closed in the evening, saying they were never closed for the deceased. Damon was once again engaged in educating Ahmed. "Ask Ani what he had seen when we were together with them last night." Ahmed responded with, "Ask Ani?" "Yes," said Damon. "Yes, what he saw, and he will tell you something." Ahmed continued, "I feel something that makes my hair stand, just like the spirits passing through me." While examining some of those carvings, Damon shouted, "Ah, Samson and Delilah," and kept touching and feeling the energies of everything. Sometimes one observed a puddle of camel urine on the ground, over which we had to jump, and it seemed to gain more importance to him than the ancient artifacts. Sometimes guards approached and told us not to touch anything or take photographs unless we paid them bahshish. Sometimes we saw schoolchildren climbing the huge boulders on the sides of the pyramids, despite warnings not to do so. However, It was pleasurable for me to spend some time with Makram and Ahmed rather than wasting time with thousands of illogical interrogation sessions. At the end of the day, I had a thoroughly crowded mind after being subjected to 1,000 more emotions of the most negative kind. When we retired to our rooms, I always had the fear of Damon's intrusions, for he had a couple more questions during the stillness of the night. The entire day had been like a bad joke, like many other days spent with him. It was very late at night, feeling completely exhausted with a day filled with inappropriate, unrelated, and relentless questions bombarding me. I finally retired to my room and could not wait to put my weary head on the soft pillows. I must have immediately started to fall into a restful sleep, for suddenly I found myself gazing upon my fatigued body from top to toe. Although I have often had similar dreams before, and was accustomed to seeing my physique from a different vantage point, unlike the partial image one observes when looking into a mirror, this was really saddening me. I was aware of the humming sounds of the cooling system in the room, which was filled with that ever-present green, ethereal light. At this stage, I did not care whether my experience was physical or of another dimension. At least I was free from Damon the executioner's thousandfold questions. I became aware of my friend Serapis presenting his usual smiles and welcoming me anew. "It is a delight to accompany you into places distant." It did not matter any longer whether this was a real experience, an imagined one, or the afterlife. I fully intended to enjoy it. I remember a moving sensation without physically moving through the ceiling, the misty air, and looking at the softly shining moon above the rooftops. I looked at the huge swimming pool within the hotel complex from a distance high up above the ground, and watched hard-working hotel staff, cleaners and cooks busying themselves. Noticing how some of the tourists from all corners of the world and a number of locals were still eating and heavily drinking. When outside the hotel complex and floating above the roadside, a young camel and its owner made an appearance in front of me. The old man called it Dudu, and the camel made a grunt and looked in our direction. Was this really a dream, or what? I heard Serapis comment, "Is it not strange how humans cannot see, even ignoring when they can, while this animal notices us?" I knew what he meant. Humans could not see us, since we were in a different dimension, but the animal was sensitive enough to notice us. A very luminous light shone from within everything, and the bashish collectors could not disturb anyone. It was indeed a delightful experience to soar gently upwards like a balloon. The whole city looked mistier from this distance. I glanced back at the Nile Valley, ancient Memphis, and Alexandria. Going further up, I could see the outlines of the streets and other buildings clearly, and the city lights from around the Mediterranean were a sight to behold. I could detect Sudan, Algiers, the Red Sea, Turkey, Italy. Earth looked so peaceful. As we rose further, I could see the glorious stars all around me, while the sun appeared like a dull glow at first. There were many man-made satellites above the Earth's upper atmosphere. Although it may be laughed at by some people or forbidden to speak of, there were indeed many extraterrestrial craft floating into all directions. The Mir space station was also in view, and the astronauts were occupied with various tasks. A bleak-looking moon, so distant yet so close, made an appearance, and was certainly better observed from this vantage point. its magnificent craters, rocks, and even some mechanical-looking structures blended beautifully with the known background. My experience was more and more like an astral journey, and felt like what others claimed to have experienced in such outings, but who have unfortunately been laughed at. It is because of this that I felt the need to hide my experiences from people until now. I cannot see any reason to hide them any longer. I am no longer concerned what others think. I shall never deny the possibilities, no matter how outlandish they may sound. Soon after, I was looking at an intergalactic vessel, similar to what we had witnessed by the rock next to the Sphinx. If this was a dream, it was a fantastic one. If, however, it was what I really thought it to be, it would be magical. Later, we were inside. All I knew was that the friends who invited us in were those who have developed sciences whereby astral, ethereal, and physical barriers could be breached. Then I noticed my longtime friend Solteg welcoming me. "Come, beloved friend," he said, "we have some others for you to meet." The group gathered therein gave the impression that they were eager to listen and share their wisdom with each other. This was the beginning of something important. There were many others who could be trusted to pass on the knowledge to humanity. Think about the beginnings of life on Earth, the real origins of humanity, or perhaps even things still to be discovered. Let us also remember that the information vital for humanity might have been hidden until now, or it could have been nothing new for the seeker and discoverer. Frankly, the knowledge available from those ancient times has not always been correctly interpreted, or else totally ignored. Memories about man's true past are contained within their unconscious makeup. Civilizations have flourished many times over, and man himself has continually destroyed valuable antiquities. Mankind have devoted their lives only to annihilate thousands of others. Is it any different today? As discussions progressed, or other technicalities were explained, and details of resources known on Earth were considered, one of them was the so-called Book of Life. It was almost like a time travel into history, so real, so tangible, and so exciting. For a brief moment, the experience felt like the reality, and all else passing dreams. This was just the way I had experienced it before, but we cannot forget that our imagination could make things observed in the astral dimension appear tangible and alive with energy. When we looked into the history, everything looked fresh, e.g. ancient sculptures presented their former glory as if they had just been created. Some of the carvings depicting ancient astronauts were not much different when compared to today. Many races we know of looked as if they had migrated from other worlds. Some of the research material I personally read about in regard to history seemed to come alive here. Maybe my mind was creating the whole scenario as a result of my imagination, but then again, maybe not. Because my experience was too real to just be imagined. People herein were from all corners of galactic space, and I believe some were indeed from what is known on Earth as the Pleiadian system. We heard stories in regard to the subject of creation, as believed by the ancients, and as related in the holy books. When looking at the Earth from within the confines of the spacecraft, one felt like an astronaut traversing the globe from a vast distance, floating towards the gleaming face of the moon. Soon, a blue horizon shone in the blackened background, with magnificent jewel-like spots of light, shining with a different glow. One could stay here for a long period of time without tiring. I could not estimate how long had passed, for the time element in the astral sense presented a different system, unlike that of the three-dimensional Earthian one. As I mentioned before, even if this was no more than a blend of imagined and previously studied subjects, they were truly alive in this brilliant state of consciousness and becoming more enjoyable. It was hard to call the experience purely an illusion. At the same time, after all the wisdom shared, it was not easy to wake up from one's slumber. However, a single thought remained in my mind as I opened my eyes to a new day. There will have to be a galactic unity which could encourage and assist modern humanity in thought and creativity without the currently known ills. Personally, I believe it to be the inevitable reality. Let us turn our attention for a moment to 10 to 6 in the evening on the 4th of November. There was a moment in time when Damon was shouting into his mobile telephone fiercely and occasionally turning his head to look at a number of cassette tapes I had brought with me. Obviously, extremely agitated as he often was, with whoever he was talking to, at the same time demanding to know whether I was wasting media by recording music. I was probably committing one of the great sins amongst many others. This was not imagined. It was real. By his command, they were reserved only to be used for more important matters he raised when interrogating me. The audio recordings he was inquiring about were a collection of tapes from the start of our unfortunate journey. "Did you tape all our discussions?" So saying, he lit another of his joints, before continuing with his perceived wisdom. Even the mildest of so-called conversations often took another twist towards extreme agitation for no valid reason. Since some of those recordings were duplicates, I decided to reuse them, but he still demanded to know, why did they have to be wiped off? What if there were things to listen to? I don't want to miss any secrets. I had already given him a number of tapes containing my own programs to listen to, but Damon had to have everything right now. However, anything he borrowed would never be returned. As usual, all day long he kept asking for what reason they had to be wiped off, endlessly repeating himself that he could not understand the motive behind it, although I had very clearly explained why I felt the need to do so. "Bring them all to my house. We copy them in 20 minutes. He must have forgotten for a moment that we were in Egypt, and I needed spare media urgently. He was also agonizing over my other sins. "What do you do with your time? All day? Seriously, when I look for you, and I can't find you, your tape is closed, your telephone is closed." Obviously, he never listened to my responses, explaining why I kept busy with work, paintings, and doing things he needed not know anything about. He could not comprehend that I was an individual, and due to his inability to understand other people, he kept asking, "What do you mean? You're a busy man? And what do you mean with that, Suren? I'm also a very busy man." He was once again displaying his usual self. I explained again that I wrote, painted works of art, recorded, generally kept doing lots of things. I needed time to think and be creative. "What do you mean? You're closing? Detaching yourself? So you concentrate better? What if your daughter called?" Never listening to my responses, he kept asking, "But why? I'm asking you why. What are you doing?" Maybe he wanted to know if I was doing what his servants were engaged in. Streetwise enterprises, selling what he valued most. Since there was more than just one way to make millions of dollars, and he had plenty of it, he became more insistent. "What? As soon as you start doing something, Wouldn't you have 5 minutes break for coffee, food, or go out with your friends? As we furthered our most important discussions, he repeatedly demanded, "Why did your family leave you?" as if it was any of his business. Damon clearly demonstrated that by denigrating people, it made him feel proud and superior. He claimed that I was probably flying to the skies and escaping the world on a daily basis. "Ah, I think Christy is doing the same." A little later exclaiming, No respect. You see, if someone gives me a phone number, I ring." But he ignored the fact that he had not given me his number in the first instance. It was most unusual to see him shake those cassettes, one by one, close to his ears, also sniffing them. What was he hoping to detect? "It doesn't matter what the temperature is in the house. I always get up naked to eat something, and I'm telling to myself the last 6-7 months, I'm coming from somewhere. I don't know where, but I'm coming from somewhere. As Christy says, we go there a lot. She takes me. Now I understand. But I'm coming from somewhere. Now the other question that is bugging me," and he was ever ready to find fault with everybody. Was it due to him being the chosen of God, as he often claimed? "You know what? I was very annoyed with you sitting on the old donkey, because you don't do things like that, because the donkey didn't have food for 2 weeks now. You see how skinny he was?" But the owner of the humble beast asked to have a photograph of it with a soldier, as he called me. I obviously appeared to be sitting on the animal. I could easily stand over the top of the donkey without sitting on it, but if I would do so, my feet would still be touching the ground. "Tell Serapis to bless this animal somehow." Everything trivial was more important to him than anything else. On the other hand, Makram wanted me to meet a professor of Egyptology, but Damon did not approve, for he did not want to waste time with something like that. Instead, he preferred to load me with a multitude of questions, as necessitated by his elitism. Later, one heard him say, "I wasn't like yesterday at the pyramids. Although I don't do much sports, I am younger and much stronger than you. But you were real fast, no problems. I was killing myself. I couldn't breathe when we were inside the chamber. If I walk from A to B a little faster, I lose my breath. My legs wouldn't carry me." Climbing inside the pyramids did not bother me. "No," shouted the other. "No, you see, I'm saying that I'm surprising myself. I could do all those things without realizing." Later that day, we visited a glass ornaments shop and a papyrus factory, where I talked to the proprietor about positive thinking, for that is what they were talking about at the time. Damon took it as a psychic endeavor, and was angry with me for not demanding any money for my efforts. Those so-called conversations we had, as usual, have been recolored and changed. "Tell me, Professore, are they saying anything? Are they giving us any information? Are they putting thoughts in my mind?" Apparently his Mr. Megoya was telling him to question Suren for whatever reason, and it was progressively very hard to follow what we were really discussing. "My brother was also born on the 12th of the 12th, like you. But I am Sagittarian, but I am different. He sent me a fax, in Rosh Hashanah. He's there, I'm here. I don't ring him. I don't talk to him. Nearly 30 years passed." Suddenly, the subject once again changed as he shouted, "Look, look, look!" pointing at a squirrel. When I was able to inquire about the next morning's flight to Luxor, the usual questions followed. Where are we in the plan? When is it going to be revealed? When? Are we the messengers of what? Yeah, we need people. Where the subject was going to lead was highly debatable. I don't know your friends, but my impression of you is that you are a mystery man, somebody wanting to get away. Several unthought of subjects later, he continued, Yeah, but I woke up with this in my tummy, without thinking of going to Egypt. I never wanted to go to Egypt, not in my life, but it came to me. I just woke up in the morning with night sweats. I remember thinking, I'm going to Egypt. When considering Luxor, he said, So, the friends will come there for sure. These friends were meant to be people from the invisible realm. But I wanted them to come physical like you and me. I expect everybody around us to see them. He laughed hysterically. So, I'm waiting. Magic is there. It continued without a break until very late at night, and into the early hours of the morning. One had to endure it for peace sake. Thoughts come from the gods, through the instrument. It seems Christie had done a good job teaching him wisdom. Oh, how much I wished this torture would end, so that I could go to my slumber, even if it was no more than just 5 minutes. So, we belong to the same pyramid? We kept discussing every subject one could imagine. And now we were apparently concentrating on energy centers. They must give me something tangible, because we need something tangible when I come back. I'm serious, Suren. I told my partner today I saw a UFO. He believes too. He knows I'm a bit cuckoo. He was not at all satisfied with what he physically experienced, considering it not tangible, like the ones seen on television. What did he really want? But I never thought they would come this way. However, what had been observed by the rock next to the Sphinx was very tangible and real. It was not imagined, and it was not a daydream. They did not land and pick him up, and Serapis had not materialized in front of him. He kept repeating, And now I want to see things, not imagining things. I don't want to pretend to see. So, what was it he saw by the Sphinx? There were many places to see when we arrived in Luxor, like the temple sacred to Ammon, Mut, and Khons. It was lined with sphinxes in a processional way leading from the temple of Ammon in Karnak and the pylons at the entrance to Ramesses III's temple in Medinet Habu. I had been looking forward to visiting Luxor and walking through the pylons again, but I was certainly not looking forward to being tapped on my arms and shoulders while taking pictures, being obliged to answer a multitude of unrelated questions. I recorded everything spoken with Damon at his demand. One can still listen to them, as it was then, and can hear exactly what kinds of names I was called. They are indeed too ugly to mention. I was told that Mr. Megoya has been instructing him to name me anew with his expletives, while bombarding me with his important questions. After we were picked up from the airport by other tour guides, Damon could not wait to roll yet another of his dietary joints. When on the boat, while exclaiming, Now I want to see things, miracles. One had hoped it was going to be a more pleasurable trip. But it seemed I was only expected to facilitate the fulfillment of Damon's expectations. As we discussed the issue in detail, I was to paint some other murals for him, but obviously he believed he was entitled to dictate my every move, his behavior declaring it loud and clear. I have truly regretted the entire journey I have undertaken. The rippling waters gently splashing against the sides of the boat were inducing a hypnotic sleep state. Luckily, we had not too many things to carry, for most of our belongings were left in the safekeeping of the Mövenpick in Cairo, taking only the necessities and audiovisual recording equipment. On the other hand, whenever the other demanded to borrow the recorded media to listen to, I felt the desperate need to find all kinds of excuses not to oblige, knowing he would never return them back. And the occasions, sounds, impressions, and those so-called important discussions with him would not be fully and accurately described within the pages you are currently reading or listening to. However, you will be able to read a more detailed version of the whole story in a different book following this one. Some of the excuses one needed to formulate in avoiding the loss of media led to further accusations of me being a forgetful idiot. As far as Damon was concerned, everybody needed to be either a commoner or not worthy to live, unless they belonged to the chosen ones. My soul was crying in utter desperation, feeling all alone, encapsulated in a human form within circumstances I did not wish to be in. At times, I felt like a clown, lost in the desert, crying, sighing, obliged to find answers for every nonsense the other presented. Whenever I listen to those recordings, my eyes water, as all the emotions are relived. Perhaps even being abandoned in the desert was better than being questioned eternally about my integrity, knowledge, and intelligence. That familiar song, sung by the other, continually intruded into my reverie. Let them give me my stick, my stick. Start those fucking miracles now. Why? Remembering that he was allegedly psychically encouraged and convinced about his supreme origins, and, as he himself often declared, it gave him authority to command others as he pleased. A fantasy created by those psychics, followed by unanticipated disappointments and the ugliest behavior patterns. I've been very, very successful. I was lucky. Serve me, and I will make you very, very rich. His demands and relentless, multitudinous questions were particularly fired at me when I was fatigued, exhausted, and traumatized. The joy had fled away. In truth, one needed to walk away from it, never to return back. Recalling the words of my other friends back home, like Joan, give it a chance, and you will see that everything will be all right, sounded like a sick joke. Damon was encouraging me to give up all my friends and start with another group of people he chose to conduct my meditation sessions. Later, still complaining, he told me, "It seems you've done a good job with me. You're a good psychologist. Until now, and I can't stop thinking of you all the time. Why? Everybody on board were getting really excited, and I could feel it so strongly when the motors of the boat started, but I could not share that excitement, feeling lost in the depression I was inflicted with. I was happy hearing other people's voices relaying their enthusiasm and joy as they echoed in the warm air sweeping over the Nile. Those boats were very luxurious, with swimming pools, reception areas, dance halls, and dining rooms. They resembled floating hotels, and their safety precautions were excellent. First thing in the morning, sounds streamed from the loudspeakers in our berths, broadcasting a passage from the Muslim holy book if we did not turn them off. Everything was meticulously catered for, yet whatever the day brought, whether morning or evening, I was no longer bothered about it. Damon had started once again with his wisdom when we were having our breakfast, and spoke at length about the importance of being streetwise. Do you know, when I was trying to contact you 12 months ago, before we met, and you didn't answer my calls at all, something was bugging me. That was, why didn't you answer my calls? After a moment, he furthered his great wisdom. Maybe it's good that you didn't, because if you had, I would be very, very, very possessive. Damon was convinced that he was the only righteous one and the Son of God. Some of his close associates were attempting to ask me to show them my wounds so that they could believe me. I wondered what they had been told about me. I never pretended or claimed to be anything other than myself. There have been many in the past who promised greater things, as with religious sectarianism. Multitudes seeking to find answers to their everlasting questions were inflicted with the darkness of religious pain. I was further asked, why? How come that your face is an exact replica of the original Sphinx, whereas mine is not? Other people noticed it also. Even your hair, the way you put your hair together. Everything is just like the Sphinx. Professore, who are you really? Why? Why is not like that with me? Why? Another time he advised me, listen to your little brother. I'm telling you, Suren, when we are back home, you tell them you no longer want to see them. Channel to my friends, and you'll become rich. Very, very rich, I promise. That was truly exceptional. You will be rich. Some people are very dependent, others possessively obsessive, giving no chance to anybody to grow, let alone live their own lives. We need to ask, are we taking advantage of the opportunity to grow? Do we perhaps deny the opportunity to others to grow? Are we hindering their growth? Some cults and religions of darkness do precisely that.